Is it stable?
Yes, it's stable.
It's all about diffusion. Settings.
Explained.
So, here we are in Deforum Stable Diffusion notebook. Today I'm going to explain every single setting to the best of my ability.
Everything.
I work in film and animation professionally, and I do coding mostly as a hobby, etc. I definitely don't consider myself a programmer, but I know enough, especially just to run a notebook. So if you have no idea what any of this even is, it's a Google Colab Notebook. I'm not going to go over how to do that in this tutorial. I have a tutorial showing the absolute basics just to run a notebook. If you're interested in that, I'll post a link in the description. So here we are. First thing, I like to open this up, just gives you more space. You can kind of jump around if you like. But so with the setup, I'm not going to run this notebook, but pretty much you would download the CKPT file and just tick all these boxes and get started from there. First off, a lot of people have been asking about my voice. Yes, this is my voice, but I live in Manhattan, recording this right near Times Square. There's so much noise. So I have to do some audio editing, which sometimes can make my voice a little froggy. And also I'm in the witness protection program. So let's get started. You came here for the settings, and let's go. So first we'll start with the animation settings. Right off the bat, this is none, which would give you a still image. You have 2D animation, which would be controlled by the angle, zoom, translation X, translation Y, and movements. And you have 3D animation, which will be controlled by translation Z, rotation, 3DX, Y, Z, etc. Plus, it allows you to use these settings in depth warping, which I'll go over in a minute. So, video input, which is my personal favorite, that'll be the next tutorial I release. I really enjoy it as someone who works in video, but that pretty much allows you to take a video and rotoscope or animate over it. And finally is interpolation, which, I think the only use case for it would be if you just want to see your prompts go through really quick. For example, say with these default animation prompts, it would just jump through them all in a pretty fast manner so you can get an idea of what your outcome possibly would be. Otherwise, I don't see any purpose for it. Next, frames. This will be if you're animating, you want, 30 frames per second, you would time it, and that would be your max frames per your thing. Or in video, it would automatically match whatever your video is. Border, there's wrap, and then replicate. I prefer replicate because wrap sometimes can get a little wonky in animation, but replicate also might start repeating, doing like a mirror type effect when things are moving. Now, here we are in motion parameters. Now the angle, obviously, it would be like a clockwise and counterclockwise movements, depending if you do positive or negative. And of course, you can keyframe all this, say 20 frames and blah, blah, blah. You put in a different movement, and at 20 frames, it'll start moving. That's positive, so I think it's clockwise, and so on and so forth. Next would be zoom. Obviously, will be if you're flying into something, zooming like on a camera or whatever, X would be left and right, and Y would be up and down. So Z would only affect 3D space. So these would be all the ones you'd use for 2D. I prefer 2D, but everybody likes what they like.
I like you.
So next, these would be the 3D settings. So Z would be similar to the zoom. It's on the Z plane. If you're familiar with, 3D software like Cinema 4D, Blender, whatever. Even though in Blender, I think the Z is backwards from all 3D software. I've used like Houdini in my Cinema 4D. And Now for the rotate, and this is by pixels into movement in these. So say you put 10, it'll move 10 pixels per frame. Now with the rotations, you have to be real delicate with these. They're set to degrees and angle. So say you are pointing a camera at your subject, X, would be going around you on the X plane. Y would be going, around you on the Y plane, and Z, etc. I'll have little examples popping up on the side here. But if you're familiar with 3D animation software, this will be much more simple. If you're not, then, hopefully these visual examples help. Now, next is the noise schedule. So I work in digital animation, one of the biggest things we usually try to do with animation and VFX and everything else is we add a little bit of grain or a little bit of noise. It just kind of helps make things look more realistic. If you want everything to be perfectly flawless, you would take this to 0. I usually do post work and I'll add my own grain or noise, etc. to it, to the way I like it, where this, sometimes I leave it on, sometimes I turn it off, but it's really faint at 0 too. Now the strength schedule, this in animation will divide your steps. So say you're doing 200 steps and your strength schedule is 0.5, it'll divide 0.5 by 200, which would be 100. So after the first frame, you'll get all your steps, and then it'll divide the steps to depending what you pick. And the higher you go, the closer the frames will match and unmatch, etc. I personally like to keep it between 0.4 and 0.6, depending on my final conclusion of what I'm looking to do. Now, contrast is the difference in brightness between light and dark areas of an image. It kind of determines the number of shades in an image. So if your results are coming out too dark or too light, you would play with this. I never mess with it. I don't think it's necessary. I think it's one of the settings that's here for really fine tuning, but for artistic results, I think it's unnecessary. It just confuses people. But and we'll go over a couple more that are similar in that case. For color coherence, I put it here, lab is the best. Lab color space is more, if I could speak English, perceptually linear than the other color spaces. Perceptually linear means that a change of the same amount in color value should produce a change of about the same visual importance, etc. It's important, especially when you try to measure the perpetually difference of two colors. I working in design in the past and this and that, you would know more about this. You could turn it off. I don't know. I've done it in the past. It gets a little wonky. I feel it's better to keep it on. Now, HSV would be hue, saturation, visibility, or sometimes you see HSL, lightness. If you work in design or Photoshop, you understand this more. RGB is color space defined by chromaticity coordinates of red, green, and blue, additive primaries. The white point is usually a standard illuminant. This is really, if you want to dive deep into that, for rendering out for specific color spaces, but visually, lab is the best. You could research more about RGB and HSL and why each one is different, etc. But lab, I feel, is the best. Now, depth warping, this is a new feature which only works with 3D. I don't use it. I don't really do a lot of the 3D animations. I feel it's still a little buggy. Even when using depth warping, it's crashed. It crashes on me a lot, and I have a Pro Plus account, so I feel it still needs a little work, but I'll still go over the settings. And at some point after this tutorial, I plan on making tutorials on independent sections like 3D animation or just masks, and video input will be the next one. But so depth warping pretty much tries to meld each frame together, so it makes it more smoother and cleaner and less jittery. I do that type of thing. If I want those results, I do it in Adobe After Effects Post. You could do it in DaVinci, Premiere, but whatever, Blender, I'm sure. But that's overall what that do. Now, when it comes to Midas, this is another one that, it really throws people off if you don't know about code and stuff like that, but pretty much mine just computes relative inverse depth from a single image. It kind of makes a depth map of each frame. Long story short, just
leave it alone.
There's no need to mess with that. I don't know why they added it. Somebody knows. I mean, I've even played with it and I don't really see any major differences. So FOV, which is field of view. Now it adjusts the field of view of the virtual camera from your 3D perspective. So if you know about photography, think of it more like the lens size, And lower numbers will yield a more dramatic effect and are probably good for extreme close-up images, where higher numbers would reduce that effect. So would be better for larger scenes and landscapes, but I think it maxes out at 120 and the lowest is 20. Now padding mode, another setting, which, I'll explain it, but you really shouldn't touch it. I feel it's unnecessary in most cases for artistically.
Please do not touch that.
It's a term relevant to convolutional neural networks as it refers to the amount of pixels added to an image when it's being processed by the kernel. So if you set the padding to zeros, every pixel value that is added would be a value of 0. However, if you set it to border, there'll be 1 pixel border at the image, and reflect will mirror the edges of the samples. It's very minute in my opinion. I don't notice a difference. When I get to the 3D animation tutorial, I'll dive a bit deeper, but I suggest leaving border. Now sampling mode, same thing with this. I'll post a link in the description to give you precise explanations. Otherwise, I could talk about this for an hour. If you use Photoshop or have design knowledge, there's particular reasons why you would change the sampling method. In this case, artistically, bicubic is the best in my opinion. There's no need to mess with this. Now, video input path. So if you're using a video, this is where you would put either you can go online and copy an address and put it in here. I like to drag my video into my folders and then copy the path and put it in here. Like I said, I'll dive deeper, and my next tutorial is going to be about video input, and we'll really get deep into that. Now, extract the frame. So say your video is 60 frames and you want to either speed it up or you want to get a more choppy type look. I know sometimes the video input, it just turns into like a blur, or it just looks like bad rotoscoping. So you might want to render every other frame. You change that to 2. Now your 60 frame video would render every other frame and so forth, whatever. If you want to go higher or lower, I always use it. I never do 1. I feel it's just makes your video just a blur, and it's visually unappealing in my opinion. Okay, next, interpolation. Now, if you're familiar with animation, digital animation in general, interpolation, if you don't use interpolation in your animations, like in After Effects or whatever, everything's stiff and boring and blah, blah, blah. So interpolation is great in that sense. There's not really much control. You can just turn it on, true or false. I would turn it on. I think interpolating keyframes always makes things smoother. If you're going from one speed to another speed, you don't want it to just jump in a linear way. So, it's best to turn on. Now for interpolating the frames, that's kind of similar to the depth worth perspective, where it's going to blur them together, smooth them out a little bit. I always turn it off, because if I want to smooth things out, I do it in post. So, but it's all a matter of opinion. Now, resume animation. It's a great feature. So if you say this crashes or Google kicks you off or who knows what while you're animating, you can go into your PNG sequence and find the last frame with the time string, which we'll go over here, how it saves your format here. And the time string will be the first number. You would copy that, put it in here, tick this box or check this box, resume from time string, and run it again. And then it'll start everything the same from that point. So you don't lose it. You can continue your animation. It's a great feature. I'm glad they added that. I think in my first tutorial, I was teaching an alternative way before they had that. So now, of course, prompts. This is everyone's favorite part. Now, if you're using the none feature, not animating, it'll read this area here. Now, here's the standard default it comes with. and see how it says the first prompt I want, the second prompt I want. So if you wanted to, you could put 30 prompts or 5 prompts, and when you run it, it'll create your first image from that, or batch second image from that, and so forth and so on. And that's pretty much it. I'm not going to get into what you should put in the text prompting at this point. So next would be animation prompt. So now this is the sample here. So at 0 frames, it'll follow this prompt. 20 frames, it'll change to the banana. 30, coconut, etc. So you can put in whatever you want, or just use one. I mean, you don't have to use the keyframes. You can delete all this if you want. It's pretty much it on that part. Now here we go in the run section. So first off, this is the width and the height of your final output. If you're using a free account, 512 is probably the maximum size you can go. I have a Pro Plus and I like 704 by 704 max comes out. I feel the best results. The max you can go is 1024 on each, but I mean, it doesn't crash even with a Pro Plus with an A100. When it does render, it's like mirrored. It looks strange. It doesn't look right. I'll post an example, but that's pretty much it. Your size for your final output. Sampling settings, I added this. -1 always equals random. So your seed, every time I hit run on this, it'll pick a random seed, which would say, let's just say 1000, and then say you really like the style of the image. Later on, you're like, oh man, I really want to keep this style similar to that. So you come back and reuse that seed. Now, sampler, they have all these different samplers. I've used every single one of them. I mean, this is another technical aspect. Everybody I've talked to is like KLMS. You got to use KLMS. The other ones are, I notice no difference. I mean, it's probably very minute. So it's another setting where I feel it's for the real technical people to adjust. You can always leave it at KLMS. I did a sample video about it, and it doesn't really matter. Okay, steps. This is how it's going to process your text prompt. So 50, I depending on the text prompt, like something short, like a beautiful apple, really like that. I mean, 50 steps is more than enough to calculate it. If it's something complicated, I know some people like to use prompts that are like 500 phrases and they just put in every word they can think of and they just maybe flip through the dictionary, and that's fun and cool and everything. But if you don't use enough steps, it's not going to be able to calculate it all. On my sweet spot with my text prompts, I like to have at least 100, 130, depending on the text prompt, but I never would do something that short. I would add a few other things, but that's pretty much it for steps. And then remember, the strength schedule, if you're doing animation, will divide into that as after the first frame. Now, scale, guidance scale, CVG scale, whatever they want to, I think this is a CVG scale. It will be as close, it'll calculate your prompt more accurately. So I usually go between 10 and 13, never over 15 because it gets too wonky. But like if you go below 7, I mean, the AI kind of just goes off on its own tangent, which can be fun sometimes too if you just want to see what the AI is thinking about. But otherwise, if you want it to be more accurate, I would do at least 10 for text prompts. Okay. Now, DDIM ETA, see, this is another setting where a lot of people, I feel it's unnecessary, but for the real technical people, it might matter. I mean, it's pretty much, it's a faster, by keeping it 0, it's a faster sampling of the steps while retaining good quality. I've played with it, I've adjusted it a bunch of times. I don't notice the difference. It must be so minute, but I say keep it at 0. They claim that's the best way. The Stability AI, who invented this code on their Dream Studio, they do it at 0.75, but like I said, I've done a bunch of examples. I can't see any visible differences. This will just save all your settings and everything into your Google Drive.
Save me.
Now, batch, always keep it at 1 unless you're doing still images. But the end batch is what, say you type in your prompt for an image and you want 5 versions of it, you just put 5. Okay, batch name, this is what it's gonna save. iamYork explains stable diffusion. Yeah, I know. Selfless plug. But this is what it will save in your Google Drive, say whatever you want. Now this is important here because when it saves in a PNG sequence, it's going to first number be the time string, which you'll need, and then the index and the prompt, where the prompt saves in a text file anyway. So I always go to this one, the seed, because I feel the seed's more important to me, because I might do an animation of 1,000 frames and I'm like, wow, this frame 500 looks really cool. I want to take that seed and make an image out of it. And then you have the seed there, but it comes with the prompt. Now seed behavior, so when you're animating, say whether you choose a seed or do random, it's going to take that initial number. If you have the iteration or iter, it's going to write every frame. Say your first seed was 500, then the second frame will be 501, then 502, then 503, etc., and so on. Now fixed will keep it on the initial seed the whole time, which can be cool at times. It all depends. I mean, really, if you're doing images, you're just going to get the same thing over and over. But for animation, sometimes with the movements, it can kind of hold it together a little better. But I don't know. It's used when you need it, but it'll keep the same seed with every frame. And random would be the same. Instead of iterating to 501, 502, 503, it'll just pick a random seed every time, 5,000, 25, 3, 5, 2, whatever. Iteration or random, similar in a sense, because even when your seed is going up by 1, it's still a new seed. It's not like it's not the same seed, so they don't look similar. A seed 2 and seed 3 could be 100% different in appearance. So, all right. Now make grid. So when you're making images, say you did a batch of 10 images and you want to kind of see them all next to each other, you would just check or tick on the make grid, and then how many rows. If your batch is 10, you do make grid. Now you'll have 2 rows of 5, etc. Well, that's cool if you just want to display, and it'll save in your drive as one grid too. So if you want to post like a banner of a bunch of photos at once, it's kind of cool. So Init Settings, this, you would tick it on if you want to use it, and you would put your image here, whether it's a picture of you or anything, a piece of art, this and that. You could even, I did this as an example, you can go find an image online, right click it, and copy the image address and put that in, and it'll work. The problem is, say you're 512 by 512 and the image is 1920 by 1080, automatically warp it to this size. So you kind of, if you do find an image, you want it to match this, and these always have to be increments of 64. So you kind of have to go in Photoshop or whatever photo editing software you use if you really want to get perfect and not get warped. And so the strength would be 0, obviously would have no influence of the image, and it's between 0 and 1. 1 would be a full image, but obviously you don't want that because it'll just be your image over and over again. But say 5 or 6 would give like half your image, half this. I don't use it at all as often, but also when you're doing the video, this would be your strength schedule as like an animation, the same concept. So you would use this setting. Now masks, if you're familiar with Photoshop, say you have a black circle on a white background, if you turn that into a mask, you would put it here, and you also have to put it here in this image, and obviously keep these both checked on. I'm going to do a tutorial on masks because it's a little more complicated. There's more to it to explain, but pretty much I use the mask here of a rhino in Photoshop. It's just black on white, but the black, think of it like on a piece of paper, the black would be where you would cut it out with scissors, and that would cut through the image, and as an example. And then you could invert it, so now the black would become white and do the opposite effect. And brightness adjust, so like I said, black cuts out, white keeps it there, and then of course you could do a gradient, which would be gray between black and white would be gray, and then it would be like a faded kind of mask setting. So if you adjust the brightness and the contrast, it's just going to make things less dark, less light, so it'll kind of feather the mask a little bit, and cut out less. But if I was going to use a mask, I would create it beforehand and to do what I'd like to do. But that's pretty much it, masks. And now we come to the last part. After you ran all your text prompts and everything, you would get a bunch of images saved here, and you turn that off, and you pick your frames per second. It's standard at 12. You can go 30, 60, whatever. tick this play box, and it'll create an MP4 video for you in your drive. Or if you want to use manual, you could change these settings around, add frames, lower frames. Maybe you just don't want to wait. And but it'll create a video for you, and then you have a video. If you don't do any, if some people, don't have access to third-party software for video editing, so this is a quick and easy way to get the video or animation, etc. right away to post, maybe right to social media or send to your friends or whatever. But overall, I think I covered everything. If you think I made any mistakes or you have any positive input, I would love to hear it in the comments about maybe some changes or some more detailed info would be great. Otherwise, tag me. I'm glad you're here, and I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned some stuff, and you check out my other tutorials on diving more deep into actually creating some artistic stuff with these settings. And just overall, have a great day, night, etc., and be good.
Is everything good?
iamYork.com